Moore, what if you learned that everything that scientists have been saying about global warming is a lie? That's what John Moore is saying, and what's more, he can prove it. A homicide detective and private investigator since 1973, Detective Moore was previously an intelligence analyst for the U.S. military. Using his combined skills and experience, he managed to track down and debrief several U.S. Navy classified briefings regarding global warming with shocking results. He will explain all that and much more to us tonight. John Moore, how are you this evening, sir?
Good, Michael. Good to be with you.
It's very good to have you back. I think the last time we had you here was in November, and it's really good to have you back. So, all right, let's get started. So we got a massive storm actually heading through the mid-Atlantic right now. Does that have anything to do with what we might be talking about tonight?
Well, it does, absolutely. And the federal government and other governments have been very successful at confusing people about the global warming. It is a cover story to conceal what's really going on. The powers that be want everybody to keep going to work, paying their mortgages, and watching professional football, which I think they'll be pretty successful at doing that from my observation. While at the same time, since 1979, the same federal government has been preparing for dramatic, violent rising ocean levels, rapid, abrupt climate change, things that will change our world in ways that are almost beyond comprehension. They've been preparing for them for 31 years now.
All right. So let me ask you, what exactly is causing the events to come, and actually what's going on right now? Is this a natural cycle of the Earth?
Well, it is a natural cycle, but most people don't understand the true nature of it. NASA sent up the Pioneer 10 space probe to look for a specific object in space in 1973, and in 1979 they found it. It's called a number of things. In the Bible it's called wormwood. It's also typically called Planet X. I came across a couple of years ago an interview with a man who has some pretty serious credentials. If you're going to draw a paycheck, Michael, draw a paycheck for looking at stars. This was the credentials of this gentleman, the supervising astronomer of the United States Naval Observatory, Dr. Robert Harrington, being interviewed in his office at the United States Naval Observatory in Washington, D.C., talking about the 10th planet as a matter of scientific fact, not scientific speculation, giving its orbit, its size, and its density. Yes, in fact, it is a cyclical thing, a 3,600-year cyclical thing. And the past two cycles, the closest one to us in time was during the time of Moses' passage out of Egypt. 3,600 years before that would have been the Great Flood with Noah. And every culture on our planet that had left calendars and written records recorded the same events, by the way. The Chinese, the people in South America, the people in what's now Scandinavia, all had calendars, all left written records, and they all recorded the same events taking place at the same time. For example, when the Hebrews were in the desert, they woke up every morning, there was this brownish, sweet-tasting stuff on the ground they called manna from heaven. Well, it turns out the same thing was happening in China, in South America, and in Scandinavia, all of which those peoples left written records and calendars, where every morning they woke up, the same looking, same tasting stuff, which was probably carbohydrates that was in the atmosphere and condensed when the sun hit it in the morning, fell to the ground, and you could pick it up and eat it. Those are just some small examples of the historical confirmation of the cyclical nature of what we're going through. Because of who I am and what I do, I was able to locate, Michael, a number of Navy veterans. I've stopped counting at this point, somewhere between 12 and 20 Navy veterans, mostly submarine veterans, who beginning in 1979 started attending classified briefings about violently rising ocean levels and abrupt climate change. And all these men, Michael, were shown a map. The map which you saw on my DVD, Global Warming, What the Government Isn't Telling You, with the help of the Navy, yes, sir, with the help of the Navy veterans, I recreated the map. Close enough that, you know, any small contradictions wouldn't matter, showing what the East Coast, West Coast, and Great Lakes regions and the Mississippi Valley will look like after these oceans come up to their new levels. In the same briefings, the Navy veterans were told where the safe havens were, which is the Arkansas, Missouri Ozarks, and a block of real estate up in the area of the Montana and Wyoming, way up north.
Okay.
So all the Navy veterans that I interviewed, with one exception, who's up in Montana, they've all chosen the Arkansas, Missouri Ozarks as their retirement home because of the briefings. One of them, since you and I have talked, or no, he's already gone public, but one has chosen to go public with me. His name's Tim Spencer, and he and his wife are from Florida. They were pistol students of mine last year. We're having lunch, Michael, and his wife's speaking, and she says, "You know, John, I don't like cold. I don't like ice. I don't like winter. I don't even like Missouri. I'm here because of that darn map." You know, but that's true. That's the truth. They were from Central Florida, and they weren't used to cold weather. They liked fresh seafood, but they moved here when he retired from the Navy more than 20 years ago because of the map.
Okay. Let me ask you this. And with all due respect, what is the difference between you and, say, Al Gore?
I'm more handsome.
Okay.
And I'm not fat, but no. Other than that, I've rarely run into somebody, Michael, who's watched all of his film, An Inconvenient Truth. I encourage people. You don't have to. You can probably get it from your local library and watch it. But I encourage people to watch his Academy Award-winning documentary, An Inconvenient Truth. And if you watched it before, I encourage you to watch it again for the following reason. I want you to look for the following thing, and that's the timeline he gives. They don't give a year for when things start to get bad, although they say 10 years in the future. You have to know when the film was made to know when 10 years in the future is, don't you? Since the film came out in 06, 10 years in the future would be 2016. They say things will start to get bad. That's abrupt climate change and rising ocean levels. And in the middle of the century, which now would be 40 years in the future, 2050, things will really get bad, abrupt climate change and rising ocean level. Now, Al Gore didn't pick those dates out of his hat. They come from NASA. The NASA Goddard Space Flight Institute is the lead agency in this country for dealing with these matters. By the way, Her Majesty, the Queen of England, visited there, it'll be 2 years ago this spring, and got her briefing at the NASA Space Flight Institute. That's one difference. The other difference is what's causing this. The official version of what's causing these things is man-made CO2 greenhouse gases, cow flatulence. I mean, that stretches credibility to the breaking point. But that's what they're saying, and that's part of the cover-up. Obviously and clearly, man-made CO2 greenhouse gases cannot cause increased volcanism and increased seismic activity, which of course we're seeing. We're seeing dramatic increases in volcanism, dramatic increases in seismic activity, and we will continue to, Michael, along with more violent, more bizarre, more dangerous, more damaging weather-related events like our eastern seaboard is in the process of experiencing as we speak. So those are the differences. The date, the timeline, and I'll go over that a little bit more detail here in a moment, and the cause. Where he and I agree, however, is what will be happening in the future. We disagree at what point in the future, but we both agree what will happen in the future. Violently rising ocean levels and dramatically increased violent weather events and climate change. Here's the real timeline, and it's not a date. And before I forget, this December 21st, 2012 stuff's going to get a lot of people hurt. That's more disinformation. Now, the federal government originally gave themselves until December 31st, 2010 to get their preparations complete. When I say complete, there are preparations. We're talking continuity of government, building shelters, stocking the shelters, getting everything set up for the intelligence agencies and others who are involved in continuity of government. They moved that about 5 years ago. They moved that one calendar year closer to us, and their completion date was December 31st, 2009, about 2 months ago. They continue to make preparations. I just read recently, this past fall, that NASA, the National Security Agency, is building a duplicate computer center to the one they've got at Fort Meade, Maryland. This one's being built 20 miles south of Salt Lake City in preparation for shutting down the one at Fort Meade, Maryland, which is 18 acres of Cray mainframe computers underground. It's a monumental task to do such a thing, incredibly expensive. And we just found out recently, it's kind of old news, but we weren't aware of it, that in September 2007, NASA gave a 2-year contract to an outside vendor, a private company that only provides one service. That's relocating employees. $74 million, Michael, to relocate NASA employees. Contract ran from September 07 to September 09, and it's renewable in one-year increments. Now, if you look at where NASA is, you're looking at the Kennedy Space Center, Huntsville, Alabama, Houston, Texas, all of which are at risk from rising ocean levels. You may say, well, Huntsville's quite a distance from the Gulf of Mexico. Well, it won't be very much longer, according to the Navy. Not according to John Moore. And that's what people keep saying, it's John Moore's information. No, it's classified information from the U.S. Navy is what it is. I just happen to be the guy who's the whistleblower, is all I am.
When exactly will we start seeing, I mean, I know we've seen things like earthquakes already that have been very frequent, and I know the last time that you were on with me, I've been keeping track of all the things that you said, and another guest, Dr. Rand, who also talked of Planet X. And I got to say, you guys have been very scary on the dot with stuff. And well, I have to ask, when will this start really getting bad?
Well, I know Dr. Rand. I've interviewed him on my show, Michael, and he did it right. His book is well done. He did not fall into the 2012 trap, and I complimented him on that a number of times.
Yeah.
The events that we're seeing are the precursors of events that will become more frequent, more violent, more dramatic as we go through 2010 and to 2011. What is it you're looking for? What do you expect to be seeing?
That's a good question.
Yeah. People, when they first find about this topic, Michael, they'll do what I did and what most people do. They want to see Planet X. I made an appointment with some hobbyist amateur astronomers in my neighborhood. They've got a really nice 30-inch telescope on top of a small mountain where it's very dark. And we spent a whole evening up there, and I didn't see no Planet X. That was, when was that, 2002? I didn't know much about it at the time. I didn't know it was coming up from the south. I didn't know you had to be at the Antarctic to see it. I went looking for it anyway. I didn't know all that stuff. People get obsessed with two things. They get obsessed with a specific date, which none of us have outside the intelligence community, and they get obsessed with trying to see the darn thing or get a photograph of it. There's dozens of alleged photographs of Planet X on the internet. You do a Google search, you'll find lots of photographs of what purports to be Planet X. It's possible that one or two may actually be the 10th planet. Quite frankly, in my opinion, it doesn't matter. What matters is knowing what's coming at us, knowing the time frame, which we're already into the time frame. The federal government, Michael, spent literally billions of dollars getting ready for this between 1979 and right now, building very expensive, very well-equipped underground shelters stocked with frozen pizza, freeze-dried food, DVD movies, basketball courts, everything a person could ever hope to have and need.
So you and I are really paying for this, and we're not going to get to enjoy the luxuries of it, are we?
No, sir, and quite frankly, I don't trust the engineering. being that far underground, anything like that's built with an engineering premise to withstand a certain level of seismic activity. So say it's built to withstand an 8-point shake. Well, an 8.1 is twice the magnitude, twice the force of an 8.0. And if you happen to be unlucky enough to be in a shake that exceeds the engineering of the shelter you're in, you're in no pun intended, deep trouble.
You're a done deal.
So I do, in fact, I know people who have access to these shelters. They call them hotels, by the way. The insiders call them hotels, and they have no plans of taking part in that. They simply don't.
So where will John Moore be when?
I'll be deep in the mountains of the Missouri Ozarks. That's where I'll be. That's where I live.
Right.
More than 100 miles southwest of St. Louis, with all my Navy veteran friends in the neighborhood out here in the Ozarks. You know, I was on a nationwide speaking tour, Michael, on this topic with the Prophecy Club. On my Detroit stop, it was a 3-hour presentation, by the way. On one of the breaks, a man walked up, introduced himself. He says, "John, we've wondered for years, us people in the insurance industry, why are there so many people? It's an absolute huge number of retired Navy veterans in the zip codes of the Arkansas, Missouri Ozarks." He said, "Now we know."
Okay. What can people do to be safe?
Well, there's a lot to that, and
I'm sure there is.
Well, there is. I'll explain why the Arkansas, Missouri Ozarks was chosen, and then we'll kind of expand that to include other parts of the country. The Arkansas, Missouri Ozarks was chosen for the following reasons: distance from major bodies of water, altitude above sea level, the latitude. We have fairly mild winters, although you wouldn't know what to look outside right this moment. We get 6 or 8 inches of snow. It's a pretty good sized snow, and our winter lasts about 3 months with a pretty good growing season, plenty of water, a pretty homogeneous population, mostly Christian, mostly pretty self-sufficient. Hunting and fishing are God's gift to men and women as far as the people out here where I live are concerned. Most of these folks have a garden, fruit trees, chickens, that kind of thing. All those reasons combined, Michael, and distance from major population centers. All those things combine to be the focus of the Navy as being a safe haven now. So, a farm or a ranch, a distance from a major population center that has a place you can grow fruits and vegetables, have some chickens, maybe a couple of goats, have a source of firewood, a source of potable water, a fairly decent growing season, preferably an area where you either have people you're related to by blood or marriage, or friends in the neighborhood. You don't want to be an outsider in some outlying area when there's a crisis. That would not be a good thing.
Okay.
And if you do buy real estate in an area where you're not known, you need to become known. Join the local church, the Elks Club, the Lions, the Rotary, whatever it takes to ingratiate yourself with that community. You need to be self-sufficient in every way. The likelihood of the infrastructure breaking is better than it remaining intact, quite frankly. The U.S. Navy says, not John Moore, the U.S. Navy says that the New Madrid seismic zone, which is not too far from me, by the way, will have at least 3 9-point-plus earthquakes when the Mississippi is 50 miles wide and a couple hundred feet deep. That will pretty much split the country in two, Michael. And the armies are, you've probably heard of U.S. NORTHCOM, the United States Northern Command. It's only been in existence, 6 or 7 years. Right now, they're very quietly splitting U.S. NORTHCOM east-west at the Mississippi River. They're doing it now, and it's kind of a logistical nightmare now, but it will be virtually impossible after the Mississippi River is 50 miles wide. So all the officers and NCOs, all logistics, command and control, communications, training, is all being split east-west at the Mississippi River. They're doing it now while they can do it and make some sense of it. They know they don't have much longer. If you look at, between the Canadian border and the Gulf of Mexico, the Mississippi River, there's about 20-something bridges that cross that river. The majority of them will be broken. The oil and natural gas pipelines will be broken. In fact, most of them cross the Mississippi going from Texas to the northeast right over the New Madrid seismic zone. You've got railroad lines, fiber optics, all kinds of telecommunications crossing the Mississippi on these bridges. That will all be broken and useless. You don't have bridges across the river 50 miles wide. You simply don't. Ferries are, we'd be left with ferries which are very inefficient and slow, and you don't move hundreds of semi-tractor trailers full of stuff on ferries. You move 2 or 3 at a time, maybe. So, well, it'll split the country, and the government knows it. The capital of the western side of the Mississippi will be Denver, the highest altitude city in the United States, incorporated city. And the capital east of the Mississippi will be Atlanta, the highest altitude city east of the Mississippi. In fact, I was just in Atlanta a couple of days ago. Beautiful place. The eastern seaboard, as we know it, will no longer exist. The U.S. Navy says the East Coast will take damage up to the Blue Ridge Parkway. Michael, you look at a map, you see the Blue Ridge Parkway runs north-south on the east side of the Appalachian Mountains, about 100 miles from the ocean. And that's pretty serious. We're talking an area where 50 million plus people live between Washington, D.C. and Boston.
Now, how about South Carolina and North Carolina? Will these states be under the ocean?
Well, you can, if you got Google Earth on your computer at home, anybody can do this.
Okay.
You put the pointer at the edge of the coastline there and move it west until you get to 400 feet above sea level. That's where the new ocean's going to, the new coastline's going to be. 400 feet above sea level. So
that's definitely not good.
No, well,
and the government knows about this, and this is probably a plan to really minimize the population, which would make it easier for them to take control. Is that the reason that they're not telling us?
There's lots of reasons, and a decision was made more than 30 years ago to do it this way, 31 years ago, to take care of themselves, and the rest of us barefoot peasants would be on our own. You're right, Michael. There's going to be tremendous death come out of this. It's inevitable that it would be. Death from drinking bad water. Most people don't die from starvation. They have improper nutrition, and they die from opportunistic diseases because of improper nutrition. It is possible to die from starvation. It's a horrific way to die, by the way.
I'm sure.
Yeah, but the ultimate plan is to eliminate 95% of the people on the planet. The Georgia Guidestones tell the tale. If you've ever been there, you know what I'm talking about. I haven't had the opportunity to see them in person, but I've read extensively and interviewed a couple of men who've walked up to them and read them and touched them. So, yes, there will be tremendous death, tremendous migration. In fact, I need to mention to this past Monday, the 1st of February, the Quadrennial Defense Review Report was released by the Department of Defense. I've been out of town all week and just started reading it. It's about 100 pages, and in there it talks about, according to Fox News, they released some tidbits last week. According to Fox News, the report talks about abrupt climate change, ocean levels rising and military bases being underwater, starvation, riots, and mass migrations. And I haven't got to that part yet on the Quadrennial Review, but I'm looking it up, and if you put that into your search engine, I think anybody could find it at this point, the Quadrennial Defense Review Report.
Okay. I'm going to check that out, too.
They say that the climate change in ocean levels will come from man-made CO2 greenhouse gases. They're carrying out the company line on one hand. On the other, they're being very forthright with these events that are coming at us. They just changed the map here on Google for this storm. You're in South Carolina?
Yes, sir. Columbia.
Yeah. Is the snow going to get that far south?
It's not supposed to. We had a tremendous amount of rain throughout with the storm, but we didn't see snow to speak of.
Okay.
So we've been safe from that.
Well, that's good. When I was in Atlanta this week, it started raining Thursday, I guess it was, and rained all day. The whole trip back through Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and Arkansas, it was raining the entire way. So
we've had a ton of rain here. I mean, it seems like it's, for every sunny day we've had the last couple months, we've had 4 rainy days to follow it. And,
right. Calendar year 09 here. Calendar year 09 here in Missouri, my part of Missouri, we ran 13 inches above average rainfall. Now, this past April the 8th of 09, we had a hurricane in the Ozarks. And you look at a map, we're hundreds of miles from the nearest ocean, a good 300 to 500 miles from the Gulf of Mexico. You're not supposed to have hurricanes in the Midwest,
Yeah.
I mean, that's not, if you put that on your term paper in weather school, I think you'd probably get an F, or at least years ago you would have. But on my DVD, as you know, we've got the radar image of a hurricane over Oklahoma. We're not supposed to have hurricanes over Oklahoma either, are you?
No, not at all.
Now, they've known about this for some time. In the fall following Hurricane Katrina, a friend of mine was taking a Skywarn training classes where they teach civilians to accurately observe weather and report back to the county sheriff's office. The course was being taught by a young NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, meteorologist, scientist. And on a break, Michael, they're out there in the hall talking about hurricanes, of course, and this young NOAA scientist says, quote unquote, just wait until you start seeing these hurricanes forming over land. Well, my friend knows what you and I know, and she attempted to ask a follow-up question. The young NOAA scientist, who could have been her son, a young man in his early 30s, he immediately shut up because he understood that his paycheck and pension were on the line if he said anything more. So he didn't. He did not respond to the follow-up question. But now we're having hurricanes over land. Now, all cyclonic storms, which include typhoons in the Pacific, hurricanes in the Atlantic, and tornadoes over land, all cyclonic storms are electrical in nature. And that's something we're only beginning to understand. You've probably heard some of the good old boys refer to mobile home parks as tornado magnets.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Well, it turns out they scientifically are tornado magnets. Now, you're in radio. I don't know what your engineering expertise is. I'm a ham radio operator. We have something we call a ground plane antenna, which is basically a big flat sheet of steel. If you, like the roof of a car can become a ground plane antenna, for example. If you put a whole bunch of mobile homes together in a mobile home park, those metal boxes become a large ground plane antenna. Well, here's what happens. A tornado will be zipping along through the county. It'll get a few miles opposite the mobile home park, do a 90-degree turn, and head straight for it. That happens time after time after time. And the reason is because the mobile home park becomes one huge ground plane antenna and attracts the tornado because of the electrical nature of the tornado. Now,
wow, I never knew that.
Well, we're only beginning to understand it. Now, the good old boys have been right all these years. They didn't know why, but they were right. But I encourage people to become a student of a real scientist. I'm a homicide detective, not a scientist. A real scientist, Professor James McCanney. You should have him on your show, by the way, if you can get him.
I would love to.
his time is limited, and maybe he can come on with you, Michael. But Professor McCanny has authored a number of books on weather and the 10th planet and surviving the 10th planet passage. And he gets into the electrical nature of our planet and our solar system and the universe, which, by the way, NASA says space is electrically neutral, which is far from the truth. After reading Professor McCanny and understanding what he says, and he writes his books in a non-technical language so that us individuals like myself without a scientific background, we can read it and make sense of it. But he has a weekly radio show himself, Michael, and a website. There's a link to my website, thelibertyman.com. Professor McCanny is a real scientist with real credentials, and he talks about these matters in a manner that makes a lot of sense, and just basically his message and my message complement each other.
Okay. So now there was just reports of Pluto actually having changes. They've seen changes almost like the ice is melting. And,
well, you're right.
Changing colors.
You're right.
Got something to do with this as well?
It does. We're seeing changes on a number of planets, not just Pluto. What's been described as warming on some of these other planets, the ice cap, Mars has an ice cap, I believe, the ice cap reducing. The 10th, let's talk about the 10th planet a little bit. Maybe this will make more sense to people. It's 3 to 5 times the size of Earth with a much larger iron-nickel core. It interacts with electrical energy and gravity with all these planets, ours included, and our sun. And the sun, when it starts acting up, of course, it interacts with us, and almost all Earth weather is a consequence of interaction of solar energy or lack of solar energy. All the weather on our planet. Now, people always want to bring up HAARP. HAARP is real. HAARP can manipulate weather for a short period of time in a rather compact space. When I say a short period of time, 2 or 3 days, compact space, maybe 1,000 square miles, which would be an area 100 by 100 miles, which is basically 4 counties. That's about the size they can impact and about how long they can do it. It's really nothing more than the world's largest radio frequency transmitter up there in Alaska. They doubled the size of it not too many years ago. They wanted to make sure theirs was bigger, that ours was bigger than the Russians. And they can direct that. They can direct that energy and bounce it off the ionosphere and direct it. Pretty much there may be places they can't send it, but most places, I'm sure in the Western Hemisphere and possibly a lot of places in Asia and South America and Africa, they can as well. Redirect that energy for whatever purpose they choose.
So are they able to actually switch the direction of a storm? Is that
it makes heat. What this does is make heat. And if a storm, if you've got a storm, say a hurricane, and it's hotter on one side of the hurricane than another, you can probably direct it in that manner. Professor McCanny is convinced that that's how. There was one hurricane that did a loop-the-loop down in the Caribbean. It was pretty amazing. Nobody had ever seen one do that, and he thinks they were just showing off. They could do such a thing. So if you make the atmosphere hotter on one side of the hurricane than it is on the other, you can make it move around like a shopping cart, basically.
Wow.
But they can't do that for they cannot affect all weather all the time. They can't do that, and they simply can't. It's just one big machine that can affect weather for a short period of time in a fairly compact area. But weather is changing. And most folks are recognizing that. Look at what's going on in England this year. Since you watch my DVD, you know that England, Ireland, and Scotland are just as close to the North Pole as Moscow is. A lot of people don't know that, but it is. And they've always, for centuries, enjoyed very mild winters because of the Gulf Stream, what the scientists call the North Atlantic Thermal Haline Conveyor. Warm water coming up from the Gulf of Mexico past the coast of the United States, swings right, goes east, right underneath Greenland, and comes down and warms up England, Ireland, Scotland, the coast of France, and of course the coast of Portugal before it keeps on going there, ending back up in the Gulf of Mexico. Now,
that's all changing now.
Well, it is changing. 5 years ago, it was publicly announced that the Gulf Stream had lost half of its mass and velocity. The engine that makes it work is the salt content of the Atlantic Ocean, the salinity of the ocean. That's being dramatically reduced by fresh water melting in Greenland and fresh water melting in the Antarctic. The Arctic ice at the North Pole is frozen salt water, so it doesn't affect ocean levels or salinity, either one. But this melting ice at the Antarctic and Greenland is dramatically reducing the salt content of the Atlantic Ocean and causing the Gulf Stream to lose mass and velocity. Did you happen to see the film, Michael, The Day After Tomorrow?
I sure did. I have it in my collection, as a matter of fact.
Well, I encourage people to watch it also. There's science in there, and there's science fiction, just like Al Gore's movie. Mm-hmm. Now, the science is what will happen in the future. The science is also what's happened in the past. The three youngsters are at a museum in New York City, and they're observing a display of a stuffed mastodon that was frozen, instantly frozen, flash frozen, about 3,600 years ago. The meat of these mastodons was so fresh that even I just found out it's still being sold in Paris for human consumption as a delicacy.
Oh my God.
Now, anybody who's frozen meat knows that freezing something that large, that quickly, is not easy.
No.
And a creature 3 times the size of an elephant, it's standing there eating a tropical plant. It's flash frozen while it's still eating the tropical plant. Flash frozen so fast, Michael, that the eyeballs don't deteriorate. The eyeballs of a mammal are the first thing to deteriorate. And the meat, 3,600 years later, is still fresh enough when it's thawed out for human beings to consume it and think it's really tasty.
That is very scary to think that we could freeze that quickly.
Well, that's in the movie, and the special effects do a pretty good job of depicting what that would look like when that air inversion happens, and that super cold air that's up there in the jet stream, typically 6 or 8 miles high, comes down to the surface of the planet. It's a very dramatic special effects that they did, and that's what happened to those mammoths. Something else that's science in the movie. The movie starts out with Larsen Ice Shelf B, as in Bravo, breaking off from the Antarctic continent. That's real science. That's the first scene in the film, if you recall. Mm-hmm. That's real science. That really did happen. Another part of science is the oceanographers. They're on an island off the coast of Scotland, monitoring buoys out in the North Atlantic that monitor temperatures. Now, Michael, you can do that in South Carolina. I can do it in the Ozarks. Anybody with internet access can do the same thing. You don't need to be on an island off the coast of Scotland. Mm-hmm. You can to monitor the temperature buoys. There's the readings are sent up to satellites and then they're put on the internet. So anybody can do that. So these scientists are monitoring these buoys, and what happens is that they watch in real time. They watch the Gulf Stream shut down. Now, my inside sources tell me, John, that we've got PhD oceanographers 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, watching the Gulf Stream on both sides of the Atlantic. They're very, very concerned about when it will shut down. They're all in agreement, by the way. There's no disagreement that it's in the process of shutting down. The only disagreement is when it will shut down. They build these computer models based on the salt content and how fast it's going, but basically it's educated guesses is what it is. That's why there's no consensus on it.
So will this be worldwide, or will this be like tropical areas will freeze and areas that have always been cold will actually start getting quite warm?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay.
Part of this, what the Navy's most concerned about, along with climate change, is about an 18-degree shift in true north. If that was to happen, that's what's going to cause the oceans to go bonkers. I didn't understand this, but it's common knowledge. You know, I'm just a homicide detective working here in Missouri. What do I know about oceans? Not much. It turns out they measure sea level at Cornwall, England. They just picked a rock at the edge of the ocean, put a horizontal line there a couple hundred years ago, and they said, this is sea level. It turns out, Michael, when you get to the equator, the sea level is almost 500 feet above that point in Cornwall, England. And for hundreds of miles north and south of the equator, it's well above that horizontal line in Cornwall, England, which means tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of cubic miles of water above that line in Cornwall, England, held in place by the rotation of the Earth and gravity. Anything that disrupts the rotation of the Earth, and this pole shift, an 18-degree pole shift would do this, would disrupt that bulge of water, causing the flooding the Navy is absolutely convinced is going to happen.
And how sudden will this be? Exactly. I mean, as far as we can tell.
Well, I've spent a lot of time debriefing these veterans, and one of them had very clear recollection of that specific point. He said three to 4 weeks. Once it kicks in, it would be a period of 3 to 4 weeks of these oceans coming up.
Wow.
Yeah, wow is right.
Much time.
No, you know, Arnold Schwarzenegger was on the television, I think about 3 or 4 months ago, talking about a 6 or 12-inch rise in the ocean or something in California, or maybe a foot or two. I mean, that was big news. Whatever he was talking about, a couple of foot rise in sea level. That's about as far as you're going to get out of mainstream media. That's just about as far. A friend of mine, well, it was a week ago Thursday, I was on the phone with my friend Tim Spencer. He's telling me about Fox News making this announcement about the Quadrennial Defense Review. And while he's talking to me, another friend clicks in. And he just got a call from a high-ranking member inside the U.S. government telling him about the same thing, the Quadrennial Defense Review, and how it talked about rising ocean levels and military bases being underwater. The friend who clicked in was being warned by his friend, is what was happening. We've talked about that since in some detail, and that's what was going on. He was being warned by an insider in a manner that wouldn't get the insider in trouble. Because of promises and threats, Michael, they can keep most people quiet most of the time. Tim Spencer doesn't have a pension they can take away. He's on permanent disability from being radiated on a nuclear submarine. They set up his hammock between the warheads of Polaris missiles. And 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, he was being radiated. And the man has no fear. They've taken everything from him but his life. And he has no fear, and he's gone public with me.
Okay. And so, I mean, this information has pretty much come from very reliable sources, and you have absolutely no doubt in your mind that this is going to happen.
No doubt whatsoever. I'm making my preparations accordingly. The Navy veterans that I've debriefed, they're all moved their families down here. They've got small ranches, small farms with chickens and goats and fruit trees and apples and peach trees, and tomatoes, you know, all that stuff. A way to make electricity on their own, and ready to defend it if they need to, and defend their loved ones and make sure their teenage girls aren't taken away by the bad guys. So yeah, I'm ready. My daughter and her family up in Seattle, they're on basically standby. That if Grandpa calls up, that's me. Get on a plane and come on down. You know, it could be a fast-moving thing. We simply don't know. where things start moving very fast. There's other things, and I mentioned this on my DVD, like a flu pandemic, for example, economic collapse. Those things are right in our face. The Earth changes are going to be slowly moving the next couple of years. But we're at the beginning of what might be a massive depression. The biological weapon called the swine flu could easily come back in a much more stronger weaponized version towards the end of winter here, which is when the second flu season usually starts up. So we certainly have a number of things putting us at extreme risk. And people would be prudent to prepare for those risks and get ready so that they can take care of of what they care about the most, which would be their children, their siblings, and so forth.
Well, John, I'll have to make sure you have my number, so after you call your daughter, maybe you can give me a quick ring.
Well, maybe so. Maybe so. And in fact, I was just thinking, our next show we do together, we may get Tim Spencer to come on with us. He does an occasional radio show with me when I ask him to. He was in New Orleans doing classified studies about 1995 for the Navy. And he walked across the hall to another office doing classified studies, and there was this map on the wall. And it had markings on it he simply did not understand at all. And he talked to a master chief, which is like a master sergeant. And of course, Tim would have been in his mid-20s at the time. The master chief was probably old enough to be his father. And the master chief said, "Young sailor, the only thing you need to know about this map is the white area." The white area, of course, was the Arkansas, Missouri, Ozarks. The white area. That's where you want to be. When you get out of the Navy, that's where you want to be. And, of course, he took that advice, and he moved his family up here from Florida when he retired, and he's been here ever since. He's made a home for himself, become established in the community, and he raises horses and cuts his own firewood and has a garden and does what he can given the level of physical infirmities he has from the radiation poisoning. He does a pretty good job.
Where exactly is Planet X right now in regards to our solar system?
Well, all our planets revolve on a flat plane. The 10th planet comes up from the south of that plane. And the best thing I can tell you, Michael, is that south, if you're at the Antarctic right now and have a telescope or access, it has built a new telescope in the South Pole, by the way, the South Pole telescope. If you have access to even an amateur telescope down there, you can see the 10th planet right now. And everything's highly restricted. I mean, you don't just book a flight on American Airlines to go down to the Antarctic. Everything down there is controlled by various governments. And I'm pretty sure that they control telephone calls and internet service as well. It's highly restrictive. Why in the world do you need 5,000 researchers at McMurdo Bay, by the way, in the Antarctic? What in the world could they be doing?
It's a good question.
Yeah,
but I mean, we know the answer.
Well, it's not just looking at the 10th planet. There's probably a lot of ruins from ancient civilizations a mile under that ice that they've been recovering. And one of the main goals of archaeology is to recover ancient technology. And I have a high level of confidence that's what they're doing down there. 5,000 people is an awful lot of people to be studying core samples of ice.
It sure is. It sure is.
Yeah, and
so
counting.
Now, the
what
media,
can you do down there?
The media doesn't. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I said, what can you do down there? Count penguins and take core samples. But what does the media not do?
Yeah, the media now, I mean, it's not like they know about this. Do the high ups in the media know about this and are warned not to?
At the boardroom level, they do, and I'll give you an example of corporate boardrooms. One of my contacts, he lives out there on the East Coast, not too far from here. He's mid-level management with Lowe's, and he was at a meeting this past late spring of '09. They were talking about plans for the Lowe's stores, new stores and existing stores. Here's what he told me. He says, John, there will be no new stores built near the East Coast, Gulf Coast, or West Coast. Existing stores in those areas will get no major upgrades, routine maintenance only. Now, we're talking about where 3/4 of the population lives, Michael. And the 3/4 of the population of this country lives within 100 miles of either the East Coast, the Gulf Coast, or the West Coast, leaving the other 1/4 of the population in flyover country where I am. Now, to not build new stores where most of the people are, I think that's fairly significant, a pretty major heads up. Now, of course, at that briefing, they didn't tell mid-level management why they weren't building new stores near the oceans, why there was no upgrades to stores near the oceans, routine maintenance only. My friend knew, because he and I have talked about this a number of times. In fact, he's an independent researcher, and he found out about this on his own before we ever met. He's a Messianic rabbi, and by studying the Torah, he came to understand the cyclical nature of these events.
So what is the ultimate goal? I mean, what does the government expect to have when this is all over? I mean,
they expect to have their shiny new world order ready to go.
That's exactly what I thought.
You know, with them controlling basically everything. What they're doing right now is putting all the chess pieces in place. They expect to roll through this thing and come out on the other side intact, with a lot of dead people, a lot of people with them, of course, in their safe havens, alive, ready to start over. And they fully intend to control those of us who do survive and microchip us and treat us basically as a barefoot peasants they've always treated us like.
So a lot of this is really, I mean, what is really spoken about in Bible predictions and so on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The Bible accurately talks about what would be happening in the future. The future, of course, is right now. The Bible codes, by the way, and my friend Tim Spencer keeps up with the Bible codes quite a bit. The Bible codes talk about this also, which is another fascinating topic. I don't know if you ever interviewed anybody about the Bible codes or the Torah code. It's a fascinating
I have
area.
one time, yes.
Fascinating area.
But yeah, he kind of was comparing Bible codes to the Beatles and so on, so and their songs. So it was a little different.
that would be something a bit different.
Yeah,
and I don't particularly want to go down that rabbit trail tonight with you.
Okay.
Did I send you a copy of Are We Alone in the Universe?
No, sir.
Okay.
I did get the CD, however.
Okay. That's got the interview with Dr. Harrington on there. I've just started offering it at my website in the last couple of months, and it's proven to be pretty popular. It's kind of the icing on the cake to give a lot of veracity and credibility to the whole matter. Dr. Harrington granted this interview more than 20 years ago. Shortly after, and when he granted the interview, by the way, he was a healthy, strong, vigorous man, supervising astronomer, United States Naval Observatory. He announced he was packing up equipment and going to the Antarctic to look at this thing. 6 months later, he was dead, allegedly from a fast-acting form of cancer. He didn't get the memo. He didn't get the memo.
Yeah.
He wasn't part of NASA. He didn't know that if he talked about this publicly, they're going to kill him. I mean, it's kind of a flippant tongue-in-cheek thing to say, but it's true. He simply didn't know that he was going to pay with his life for publicly revealing this information. And people like that, people with that kind of credentials, you know, a homicide detective in the Ozarks does not have any scientific credentials. I'm not part of NASA. I'm not part of the U.S. Naval Observatory. What threat do I pose to them? They know I'm not going to be on Fox News talking about this. I was on Fox News several times.
And they probably expect a lot of people not to believe it as well.
Well, you're right. You're right, Michael, and they've done a very effective job. Now, back in 01 and 02, they had a woman talking to aliens saying that the 10th planet was going to swing through here in May of '03 and wipe us out. And she's still putting out information, by the way. Her name's Nancy Leader. We've got the Jesse Ventura on TV. Now, I was in a man's living room 2 nights ago in Atlanta, Georgia, and I said, people really think they're going to see secrets on mainstream media, a broadcast like Jesse Ventura's show, talking about 2012? You know?
Yeah.
You know, I've done, you know, I got 2 radio shows of my own. I do a lot of guest appearances, Michael. I know that my guest appearances will always be on small to medium markets. It's not going to be major network stuff. I was on Fox News several times talking about terrorism back in '02, and I know it's controlled because I dealt with these people firsthand. I know that they're only allowed to do and say certain things. And that's the way it is, and you and I aren't going to change it. So I work with men like you, Michael, who are in these markets that give tens of thousands of people an opportunity to get the truth to the best of our ability.
Exactly.
That's what we're doing. That's what you and I are doing
John,
right now. Taking place at the same time. For example, when the Hebrews were in the desert, they woke up every morning. There was this brownish, sweet-tasting stuff on the ground they called manna from heaven. Well, it turns out the same thing was happening in China, in South America, and in Scandinavia, all of which those peoples left written records and calendars, where every morning they woke up, the same looking, same tasting stuff, which was probably carbohydrates that was in the atmosphere and condensed when the sun hit it in the morning, fell to the ground, and you could pick it up and eat it. Those are just some small examples of the historical confirmation of the cyclical nature of what we're going through. Because of who I am and what I do, I was able to locate, Michael, a number of Navy veterans. I've stopped counting at this point, somewhere between 12 and 20 Navy veterans, mostly submarine veterans, who beginning in 1979 started attending classified briefings about violently rising ocean levels and abrupt climate change. And all these men, Michael, were shown a map. The map which you saw on my DVD, Global Warming, What the Government Isn't Telling You, with the help of the Navy, yes, sir, with the help of the Navy veterans, I recreated the map. Close enough that, you know.
In Atlantic right now, does that have anything to do with what we might be talking about tonight?
Well, it does, absolutely. And the federal government and other governments have been very successful at confusing people about the global warming. It is a cover story to conceal what's really going on. The powers that be want everybody to keep going to work, paying their mortgages, and watching professional football, which I think they'll be pretty successful at doing that from my observation. While at the same time, since 1979, the same federal government has been preparing for dramatic, violent rising ocean levels, rapid, abrupt climate change, things that will change our world in ways that are almost beyond comprehension. They've been preparing for them for 31 years now.
All right. So let me ask you, what exactly is causing the events to come, and actually what's going on right now? Is this a natural cycle of the Earth?
Well, it is a natural cycle, but most people don't understand the true nature of it. NASA sent up the Pioneer 10 space probe to look for a specific object in space in 1970.
More. What if you learned that everything that scientists have been saying about global warming is a lie? That's what John Moore is saying, and what's more, he can prove it. a homicide detective and private investigator since 1973. Detective Moore was previously an intelligence analyst for the U.S. military. Using his combined skills and experience, he managed to track down and debrief several U.S. Navy classified briefings regarding global warming with shocking results. He will explain all that and much more to us tonight. John Moore, how are you this evening, sir?
Good, Michael. Good to be with you.
It's very good to have you back. I think the last time we had you here was in November, and it's really good to have you back. So, all right, let's get started. So we got a massive storm actually heading through the...
any small contradictions wouldn't matter. Showing what the East Coast, West Coast, and Great Lakes regions and the Mississippi Valley will look like after these oceans come up to their new levels. In the same briefings, the Navy veterans were told where the safe havens were, which is the Arkansas, Missouri Ozarks, and a block of real estate up in the area of the Montana and Wyoming, way up north.
Okay.
So all the Navy veterans that I interviewed, with one exception, who's up in Montana, they've all chosen the Arkansas, Missouri Ozarks as their retirement home because of the briefings. One of them, since you and I have talked, or no, he's already gone public, but one has chosen to go public with me. His name's Tim Spencer, and he and his wife are from Florida. They were pistol students of mine last year. We're having lunch, Michael, and his wife's speaking, and she says, "You know, John, I don't like cold. I don't like ice. I don't like winter. I don't even like Missouri. I'm here because of that darn map." You know, but that's true. That's the truth. They were from Central Florida, and they weren't used to cold weather. They liked fresh seafood, but they moved here when he retired from 73, and in 1979 they found it. It's called a number of things. In the Bible, it's called wormwood. It's also typically called Planet X. I came across a couple of years ago an interview with a man who has some pretty serious credentials. If you're going to draw a paycheck, Michael, draw a paycheck for looking at stars. This was the credentials of this gentleman, supervising astronomer of the United States Naval Observatory, Dr. Robert Harrington, being interviewed in his office at the United States Naval Observatory in Washington, D.C., talking about the 10th planet as a matter of scientific fact, not scientific speculation, giving its orbit, its size, and its density. Yes, in fact, it is a cyclical thing, a 3,600-year cyclical thing. And the past two cycles, the closest one to us in time was during the time of Moses' passage out of Egypt. 3,600 years before that would have been the Great Flood with Noah. And every culture on our planet that had left calendars and written records recorded the same events, by the way. The Chinese, the people in South America, the people in what's now Scandinavia, all had calendars, all left written records, and they all recorded the same events